Have you ever noticed how weird it is? When you start questioning things, it seems like people pull away. When you stop following what everyone else does, you get that feeling of being alone in the world. And the worst part, you start doubting whether you're right or if you've become the problem in the story. Since you were little, you learned that following rules is safe, questioning is dangerous, and standing out can cost you big time. Nobody said this directly, but you saw it in the disapproving looks when you asked too many questions, felt it in the awkward silences when you expressed a different opinion, noticed it in the punishments disguised as correction. Obedience was planted in you like a silent virus, long before you understood what freedom means. Today, every time you try to think differently, a strange guilt shows up. That voice in your head whispers, "Who do you think you are to disagree with everyone?" But what if the problem isn't you? What if you were systematically trained to shut up and obey? This text doesn't bring ready-made answers. It brings the uncomfortable questions that nobody wants you to ask. Remember school? That curious kid who asked 1,000 questions a day became an adult who swallows anything without questioning. It wasn't by accident. The classroom should have been a magical place, full of discoveries, but it turned into an assembly line to produce standardized people. You remember that classmate who always raised their hand to ask why? They were labeled as annoying, inconvenient, the one who slows down the class. Meanwhile, whoever stayed quiet, copied from the board without thinking, and repeated memorized answers got gold stars and praise. The message was crystal clear. Thinking for yourself causes problems. Blindly obeying brings rewards. Imagine if, in school, they taught you to question everything, to form your own opinions, to challenge even the teacher when something didn't make sense. Imagine what kind of adult you'd be today. But that didn't happen. Instead, you learned that there's a right answer for everything, and that answer has already been decided by someone more important than you. The educational system doesn't teach you to think. It teaches you to process information like a computer. From the early years, your natural curiosity gets pruned like a plant that bothers people. Every unanswered question, every "because I said so" you heard, every time they told you to accept something without explanation, was shaping your mind for passivity. And the worst part is that it works perfectly. You grow up afraid of being wrong, afraid of being different, afraid of asking the wrong question at the wrong time. The fear of failing isn't just about grades. It's about being rejected, excluded, marked as problematic. So you learn to swallow your doubts and follow the pre-established script. When you become an adult, you don't even notice anymore. That inner voice that had 1,000 questions was silenced so long ago that you don't even remember it existed. And then you get that strange feeling that haunts you. Why do I feel so empty when I do everything right? Besides the subjects you studied, there was another learning happening between the lines. A secret curriculum that nobody admitted to teaching. But that was more powerful than any textbook. You learned to raise your hand before speaking, to ask permission for basic needs like going to the bathroom, to stand in line without questioning, to accept that some people naturally command and others naturally obey. This invisible curriculum is a masterpiece of social engineering. It teaches you that there's a rigid hierarchy in the world and that your place in it was determined before you were even born. That questioning authority is disrespect, that having your own opinion is arrogance, that being different is a risk you can't afford to take. Think about your childhood. How many times did you hear phrases like, "because I'm telling you to," "because that's how it's done," "because it's always been that way"? These answers explain absolutely nothing, but teach a devastating lesson. You don't need to understand the world around you, just accept the place they've defined for you in it. Formal education was never neutral. It has a clear and well-defined objective: to form predictable people who don't question too much, who accept the world as it's presented to them. Functional citizens, not free thinkers. Efficient workers, not revolutionary creators. And it works so well that most people spend their entire lives without realizing they were programmed. You were systematically trained to seek external approval, to depend on others' validation, to follow rules without questioning their origin or purpose. That's why, when you finally try to think for yourself, You get that feeling of doing something forbidden, because that's exactly what they conditioned you to feel. The result? An adult who's afraid of their own mind, who feels guilty for questioning, insecure for thinking differently, isolated for not following the herd, and who spends years wondering why they feel like a stranger in their own world. After school, the media took over the role of shaping your ideas. You turn on the TV, open your phone, browse social media thinking you're getting informed, but you're actually being programmed in a much more subtle and efficient way than any teacher could manage. Modern media doesn't brutally force you to think a specific way. It does something much smarter. It convinces you that you're thinking alone when you're actually just echoing what it wants you to think. It's a masterpiece of manipulation. You watch a series and absorb values without realizing it. See a news story and form an opinion. Scroll through the feed and unconsciously decide what's normal, strange, acceptable, or condemnable. Have you noticed how certain ideas magically appear everywhere at the same time? How suddenly everyone's talking about the same thing, using exactly the same words, having almost identical opinions about complex subjects. This isn't coincidence. It's social engineering on an industrial scale. The media creates artificial consensus, and you firmly believe you reached these conclusions through your own reflection. The most brilliant part is that it doesn't even need to prohibit you from thinking differently. It simply makes divergent thinking invisible, ridiculous, or dangerous. If an idea doesn't appear on TV, on social media, in newspapers, it's as if it doesn't exist in the universe of possibilities. And if it appears, but is associated with extremist, radical, or conspiracy people, you automatically reject it without even examining its content. You grow up thinking you know the world, when you actually only know the carefully edited version that someone decided to show you. And when you encounter an idea that doesn't fit this official version, you feel physical discomfort, as if you're thinking something forbidden. Because, in a way, you really are. The media taught you not just what to think, but mainly how to feel about your own thoughts. It installed an alarm system in your mind that goes off whenever you approach genuinely independent reflection. Since you were little, you learned a brutal lesson in practice. Being different is an invitation to pain. Remember that classmate who wore different clothes, who had strange interests, who couldn't fit in with the group? They were systematically excluded, mocked, turned into the class's official target. The social message was clear as water. If you want to survive, be exactly like everyone else. This fear of rejection became the most powerful control instrument that exists, more efficient than any police, prison, or physical threat, because it attacks directly your basic need for belonging. You don't need soldiers in the street when you have the terror of social isolation patrolling your mind 24 hours a day. In adolescence, this process intensifies dramatically. You literally destroy yourself to fit in with the crowd. Listen to music you hate just because everyone listens to it. Wear clothes that don't match you because it's what's in fashion. Laugh at jokes you don't find funny. Agree with opinions that contradict your deepest intuitions, all to escape the supreme terror, being alone. And the strategy works perfectly. You're accepted, become part of the group, escape isolation. But you pay a devastating price. You stop being yourself to become a version approved by the social committee. Those parts of your personality that didn't fit the mold get buried alive, layer by layer, until you forget they existed. The problem is that this fear doesn't stay in adolescence. It follows you into adult life like a shadow. At work, you swallow your real ideas to avoid being labeled as difficult. In relationships, you hide who you really are to avoid being rejected. In the family, you play the role they expect of you, and you get lost in the middle of so much acting until you don't know anymore where the mask ends and the real person begins. The final result? An adult who's terrified of their own authenticity, who prefers to live a life that isn't theirs, rather than risk discovering who they really are. You were carefully conditioned from the cradle to revere those who know more. Parents, teachers, bosses, experts, leaders all occupy pedestals in the mental hierarchy that was built in your head. and you learned exactly what your place is in this pyramid, way down below in the sector of those who obey. But here's the perverse trick. Most of the time, respecting those who know more is just an elegant code for don't think, just accept. You can't question the doctor, even when the treatment is clearly failing. Can't disagree with the boss, even when the decision is obviously wrong. Can't doubt the expert, even when they frontally contradict your lived experience. The modern cult of authority created a toxic intellectual hierarchy. Your own perception, your intuition refined by years of experience, your intimate knowledge of your own reality. All of this is automatically discarded in favor of the opinion of whoever carries the right title, occupies the adequate position, or possesses the necessary fame. You've lived this, haven't you? Had a strong intuition about some situation, but didn't express it because who am I to disagree with an expert? Saw with your own eyes that something was wrong, but stayed quiet because the authority said it was right. Felt in your skin that a decision was absurd, but passively accepted it because it came from above. This automatic obedience to authority disconnected you from your own intelligence. You stopped trusting what you see, what you feel, what your experience teaches you. And when you finally try to exercise your own judgment, you feel guilty, as if you're committing an inadmissible act of rebellion. The result is an intellectually castrated adult who has a perfectly functional mind, but who was trained not to use it when it really matters, who prefers the safety of guided ignorance to the risk of independent wisdom. The scariest thing has already happened. You don't need anyone else to control you anymore. You do this job yourself with an efficiency that would make any dictator envious. Obedience was so perfectly internalized that now there's a permanent censor operating inside your own mind. You have an interesting idea and immediately think, better not say this. Go to express a sincere opinion and hold back. What if someone gets offended? Want to question something obvious and stop right away. Don't want to come across as radical. Self-censorship became more efficient than any external censorship because it works 24 hours a day, without breaks, without supervision. You learn so perfectly what's acceptable and what's dangerous that you don't even need to test the limits anymore. Your mind developed a system of automatic filters that works in real time. Certain ideas can't even form completely before being aborted. Certain questions die in the mental womb. Certain reflections are executed before they're even born. It's like having a totalitarian judge permanently living in your head. He's always there, watching, evaluating, correcting each thought before it becomes dangerous. This doesn't look good. This will cause problems. This isn't normal. And you religiously obey this inner voice without even realizing it was installed by others. Didn't come with you. The most tragic part is that this self-censorship robs you of the chance to discover who you really are. Your authentic ideas, your honest opinions, your deepest reflections stay eternally trapped in a mental cell. And then you live with that constant feeling of emptiness, of disconnection, as if you're watching someone else's life instead of living your own. You became a voluntary prisoner of your own mind, and the worst part, you don't even realize you have the keys to the cell in your hand. There's a collective morality that works like an invisible chain tied to your ankle. It's not based on wisdom, deep reflection, or personal experience. It's based purely on what the majority does, on what's considered normal, on what has always been this way. And you, hypnotized by this herd logic, let yourself be dragged by it without even noticing. Everyone does this. That's how it works. It's always been this way. These magic phrases completely replace the need to think. You stop asking if something is right or wrong and start asking only if it's common or uncommon. Ethics becomes a matter of social statistics, not individual conscience. Stop and think. How many important decisions in your life did you make not because you believed they were right, but simply because they were expected? How many times did you choose a path not because it made sense to you, but because it was what people like you typically did? How many of your choices were genuinely yours, and how many were just echoes of collective behavior? Herd morality is seductively comfortable. You don't need to carry the weight of thinking, questioning, taking individual responsibility for the consequences. Just follow the general flow. Do like everyone else. Don't stand out dangerously. If it goes wrong, the blame is collective. If it goes right, so is the credit. You stay safe and anonymous in the middle of the crowd. But this imaginary protection has a devastating price. You stop being a unique individual to become just another gear in the social machine. Your choices aren't yours. They belong to the collective. Your morality isn't yours. It belongs to the masses. And when you finally try to think differently, you feel like you're betraying not just others, but yourself. The result is an entire life lived on autopilot, following scripts written by other people, playing a role you never consciously chose. Truly thinking is one of the scariest things that exists, because whoever truly thinks truly chooses. And whoever truly chooses takes total responsibility for the consequences. Being genuinely free isn't the paradise they paint. It's heavy, demanding, sometimes brutally lonely. When you follow ready-made rules, you live in a kind of comforting autopilot. Someone already thought for you, already decided what's best, already traced the path. If it goes wrong, you can blame the system, society, others. But when you take control of your own life, all the consequences fall in your lap. And that can be absolutely terrifying. It's infinitely easier to complain about the job you hate than to have the courage to quit everything and build something that makes sense. It's simpler to remain in a relationship that doesn't complete you than to face the possibility of being alone while looking for someone who really matches you. It's less risky to accept a life that isn't yours than to have the audacity to build a life that's genuinely yours. True freedom requires a courage that most people aren't willing to cultivate. Courage to fail publicly, to be judged by others, to be alone sometimes. Courage to assume that you, and only you, are responsible for the quality of your life, for your choices, for your consequences. That's why, when you finally start thinking for yourself, you might feel lost, anxious, insecure. It's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because you're doing something that requires a courage that was never encouraged in you. Courage always comes accompanied by fear. That's its nature. Many people prefer the comfortable safety of obedience to the exciting risk of freedom. And there's nothing wrong with that choice, as long as it's a conscious choice, not a mental prison disguised as normalcy. True liberation doesn't come through more information, more courses, more content. It comes through a much more difficult and painful process: systematic unlearning. You need to unlearn automatic obedience, unlearn depending on others' approval to feel valid, unlearn silencing your inner voice whenever it disagrees with the crowd. It's a process that hurts like pulling out an infected tooth, because you need to first recognize and accept everything that was implanted in your mind without your conscious consent. Those beliefs you swear are yours, but that were actually carefully installed by others. Those fears that seem natural, but that were systematically cultivated. Those limitations you consider immutable realities, but that were artificially imposed. Then comes the hardest part: questioning absolutely everything, especially the things that everyone knows are true. The apparently obvious truths, the consensuses that nobody dares challenge, the social rules that nobody can explain where they came from. The truly free spirit doesn't accept anything just because it's popular, official, traditional, or convenient. It's a lonely path at first, because you'll inevitably distance yourself from people who still live completely on social autopilot. Your conversations will become deeper and more uncomfortable, your concerns more complex and less trivial, your questions more penetrating and disturbing. And not everyone is prepared or willing for this type of dialogue. But something magical happens gradually. You start finding other people who are also on this journey of self-discovery, who also question, who also think independently, who also have the courage to be authentically different. And you realize you're not alone, that there's an invisible community of free spirits scattered throughout the entire world. Most importantly, you finally start trusting your own mind, your perceptions, your intuitions, your ability to navigate through life using your own internal compass instead of blindly following maps that others drew for you. You need to understand an uncomfortable truth. Nobody's going to give you a diploma for thinking differently. Nobody's going to organize a party to celebrate your courage in questioning the system. You're not going to receive applause for having the audacity to be authentically yourself. In fact, you might receive embarrassing silence, veiled criticism, even open rejection. But you'll also experience something extremely rare in modern life: genuine integrity. Thinking for yourself is literally an act of resistance against an entire world that was designed to keep you on autopilot. It's a silent but powerful rebellion against a system that profits obscenely from your mental passivity. It's a courageous declaration of independence from your own mind. When you stop automatically swallowing everything they shove at you, when you systematically question what they tell you to accept, when you genuinely think with your own head, you become dangerous. Dangerous to those who benefit financially from your ignorance. Dangerous to those who depend politically on your obedience. Dangerous to those who built entire empires on the mental passivity of the masses. That's why literally nobody in the system will encourage you to think independently. Nobody in a position of authority will give you permission to question everything. Nobody who benefits from the status quo will congratulate you for being inconveniently different. You'll have to give yourself that permission. You'll have to be your own intellectual mentor. You'll have to find courage where it apparently doesn't exist. But when you finally make that decision, really decide to think for yourself, literally everything in your life changes. You stop being a puppet manipulated by invisible strings and become a real person with genuine agency. You stop being a simple echo of others' ideas and develop an authentic and unique voice. You stop being just another face in the crowd and become a genuinely unique individual. And that, people who think independently, is exactly what the current system most fears and actively works to prevent. You were systematically educated to be functional, not conscious, to be predictable, not creative, to repeat, not question, to serve efficiently, not lead courageously. And this programming worked perfectly for a long time. You fit the molds, were socially accepted, didn't cause inconvenient problems for anyone. But now you know all this. You know you were programmed like a computer. You know you were artificially limited. You know you were subtly controlled. The devastating question is no longer, why did they do this to me? The question that will define the rest of your life is much more urgent. What are you going to do with this awareness now? Will you continue obeying out of habit, or will you finally start living by conscious choice? If this video provoked you, unsettled you, or made you remember who you once were, you're ready for the next step. That's why I created the ebook, Think for Yourself, a guide to escaping mental slavery in the modern world. A practical, direct guide for those who are tired of living on autopilot and want to regain control of their own mind. Check it out in the first pinned comment. It's no longer about recognizing the problem. It's about having the courage to do something concrete with this awareness. Mental freedom begins when you decide to stop asking permission to think